Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Fandom Track here at ConTinual. I'm your host, Gail C. Martin, and tonight we're going to be talking about Fight the Faeries, the Fae in Supernatural. But first, let's have our panelists introduce themselves. Kristen?
Hi, I'm Kristen Jackson. I'm a graphic designer and visual communications person. I work mostly with the people in the film industry. I've been a fan of Supernatural since the very beginning and followed it all the way through to the final episode of the 15th season. I've worked in the past with some of the people behind the scenes, so I've really been involved with the show at all possible levels.
That's cool. How about you, Michelle?
I am Michelle Crowley. I am a lecturer of communication studies and popular culture at Northern Kentucky University. And the Supernatural fandom and Supernatural lore has always been kind of on my peripheral until a couple years ago. I really fell down deep into the rabbit hole and have started to kind of change my entire academic career towards a fan studies Supernatural avenue. So pretty excited to continue on with that.
Very, very good. And I'm Gail C. Martin, and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic fantasy and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. But one thing holds true across both pen names and all the books is they are and always have been worlds that Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. So we are talking about the Fae in Supernatural, and anybody who's familiar with the series, a couple of episodes come to mind immediately. But as we've chatted about ahead of time, there's a lot more than maybe some people realize in terms of the Fae showing up in the series. But let's knock off the easy ones first. And the episode of Clap Your Hands If You Believe. There's so much there. It's a Soulless Sam episode. Dean gets abducted by fairies. Where do we even start with this episode?
Let's see. For me, I love the intro of the sort of the X-Files spin. And so they kind of started us down a path where we thought that maybe we'd be getting actual UFOs and alien episode introduced to the series, but instead they went a completely opposite direction and took a fairy approach, which personally it was something that I had really been wanting to see in the series for a long time, because I thought that they really hadn't done any big exploration onto that side of a supernatural realm. And they kind of addressed it through the leprechaun when he was saying, that's my side of the fence, or my part of the world, and it's very different from the angels and the demons. So I really had been looking forward to the episode, and it did not disappoint. I love the comedy, I love the sort of the threat aspect, but Jensen Ackles was like in his moment, in his element, the entire episode. Very entertaining, and I also forgot how much I really disliked Soulless Sam. So I gained new appreciation for Sam with a soul.
Yeah, I lost my brother. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I've gotten over it. Were you a child? No, it was about half an hour ago. How about you, Michelle?
I love the episode. It's on my short list of my favorite episodes, and it's the one situation where I do like Soulless Sam. Other times it was like, not really doing it for me, but Soulless Sam in this particular case was really, really, really in his element. And I also find it very refreshing that their portrayal of the leprechaun is not the Notre Dame Fighting Irish Lucky Charms kind of character. It's the real wish-granting fae of the either Seelie or Unseelie courts. And it's someone that you don't mess with. And even though they have their weaknesses, the clockmaker, he was completely he gave up his son in order to continue on and with his work. But at the same time, it's like, did he really think that was gonna happen that way? And the leprechaun was completely, unfazed. He's like, yep, you made a deal. That's what we do. Don't ask for help if you don't want to pay for it. And that was just refreshing as being a person that through my extensive live action role play career, I've done a lot of research when it comes to Celtic mythology and the Tuatha De Danann and those sorts of the preternatural creatures. That's what they are. And it was good to see. I really don't want to call it a good representation of my my heritage, but better than some.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it really was another kind of deal making. We saw a lot of crossroads deals and demon deals, but the deals with the Fae are equally ancient in lore. And the what I liked about it was they weren't cute, and the real Fae, legendary Fae, weren't cute either. They were terrifying, even if they were beautiful at the time. And so I thought that fit in perfectly to the world of supernatural. And honestly, I could have traded some of the angels and demons for a little more Fae, because it was like, oh gosh, we got another angel and demon war coming. Could we just go back to Oberon for a little bit? But that isn't the direction.
Give me some more banshees. I want some more banshees.
Yes. And, we never really did get the answer to that whole thing about servicing Oberon. I mean, fan fiction has done a wonderful job of filling in some of those gaps, but we didn't really get a canon explanation on that.
Yeah, I know that I've already said many times to my friends that if Supernatural does have a feature film in its future, I would give anything to, to tell a writer, get a hold of one of the writers and say, please make it a story that explores a Fae element, as opposed to revisiting some of the angels and demons conflicts that we've already had. And I would love to have some, like a dark fantasy take. And I think that movie would sell. At least it would sell to the fans. The wider audience, I think there's enough Harry Potter heads out there that would say, an adult version of a dark fantasy, I think it would work.
Well, it's not just Harry Potter. Harry Dresden spent 2 or 3 books in the Fae realm. I really can't look at Lake Michigan without looking for the island that's not there. And Laura K. Hamilton had the Mary Gentry series. Mercedes Lackey has written Fae extensively. So there's a fair amount of fandom out there with exposure to more legendarily accurate Fae stories. But supernatural fandom has always been small but mighty. So maybe if they come back for extra episodes or a movie or whatever they do, Jared was just teasing about that in his stage last weekend. Maybe we'd get some Fae. That would be cool.
But would it be harder to explain? Because there are, like the red cap, if you didn't know what the guy with the red hat was who was following Dean throughout the, up and down the alleys, you'd be like, well, what was that guy about? So you'd
It's
really
the Travelocity dome.
They'd have to do one of the, like in the first season of Supernatural, where they did a little bit of walking and talking and explaining things. They'd probably have to do some of that if they wanted to do a movie that featured that world, to introduce people who maybe, a vampire, werewolves, we've all been there for those. But, some of those more, the little finer print, less well-known types of Fae characters probably would need a little bit of explaining.
But that also would give the writers so much more freedom with where we can go with it, because there are so many different versions and there's so many different retellings, and I mean there's thousands of years of Celtic fairy Fae lore that they could play around with and discover more of, and, you know, take some artistic license with. And I think it would give them a bit more of a, I don't know, they have a bit more of a pool from which to pull from, I guess,
Well,
for the
you know,
information, instead of just, you know, here's an angel, here's a demon, he's good, not really, he's bad, not really.
You know, the other
Go.
thing about doing Fae is Chuck's gone, Jack's running heaven, Rowena's got hell in hand. Angels and demons really shouldn't be a problem anymore.
Yeah.
So who's left? Well, since they killed off all the ancient gods in Hammer of the Gods, they're not around to cause trouble. And that kind of leaves the ancient races like the Fae.
Yeah, because we never really knew if their realm was touched when Chuck was kind of destroying all the different worlds, because he was destroying different realities, but it sounded like the Fae were in their own completely separate deal. So, you know, that's kind of why I'd been wondering too, is, you know, why they weren't drawn in as potential allies to kind of stop the great, you know, destruction and reboot of the universe. Maybe they weren't impacted at all. Maybe they had their own separate universe and would have just carried on just fine by themselves. But I don't know. I just that sort of that concept where he said we have the leprechaun said we have back doors, we have ways to get in. So, you know, maybe that could be a future big bad there.
Well, the ancient peoples wouldn't believe in the Judeo-Christian Chuck type God. And so they're, you know, it kind of like goes both ways. If you don't believe in them, they don't believe in you. And therefore Chuck couldn't Thanos them out of existence. And so, yeah, they are just kind of chilling over there on the sidelines saying, hey, well, looks like Earth is unguarded. Want to go have some fun?
Well, and a lot of lore holds that the Seelie and Unseelie courts and the realm is beyond the pale. It's not our realm. That's why you have to step in a mushroom circle or follow the foxfire or go to one of those liminal spaces to pass into a different place. And if heaven and hell still exist, which are really alternate realms, then I don't know why the fairy realm couldn't still exist also, assuming Chuck even created it. Chuck
That
was
kind of,
Chuck was arrogant enough to claim that he created everything, and maybe they pre-existed. After all, death did. Fairies is a pre-existing condition.
Oh no, so is death now a fae folk?
Oh dear.
Well, they never really answered with Billy gone. Does that mean nobody dies anymore? I mean, no, it can't, because Sam aged and died. So who took over for Billy? The next Reaper to get killed, but who's going around killing Reapers? You know, it was sort of a hole, just a little bit.
Yeah. And for sure, when, you know, the big hole that, you know, like you had said with what happened with Oberon, because he had a claim on Dean. So that's still, that little plot thread is still dangling out there. That could be a potential, you know, future story.
Not
You know,
necessarily, because Dean dies, and when you die, it usually voids those contracts. Because the preternaturals like their service members to be alive. They don't really deal that much with the, you know, the death and that extra plane. They're not really like the same thing. Like when you die, you don't go to the never never, you go somewhere else.
So when Dean died and went to purgatory, or, you know, came back as a demon, those times might have invalidated the claim on him from Oberon.
Interesting. But Dean is definitely the kind that the fairies would take. Beautiful and brave. I mean, that's what they've always wanted. And a little on the
eldest.
Huh?
It has to be the eldest.
So, yeah. That's definitely a possibility there. Well, I thought we were going to get into more of the Fae with Mrs. Butters, with the whole wood nymph thing.
Mhm.
I didn't know if she was going to, pull a Dobby in the end fight with Chuck on the, that you shall not harm Harry Potter, or whether she was going to show up with a whole army of wood nymphs or something. But the Men of Letters had obviously done some research, however sketchy and skeevy that is, into the Fae. And it was one of those tantalizing things that just dropped.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and she was, she could qualify as somebody who did have a vested interest in the maintaining the world, because she wanted to go back to her forest. She wanted to go back to her trees. And so when Chuck was destroying everything, she would have definitely been impacted, other realm or not.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So there's then that would mean that there's some of the Fae who are definitely connected to the world as it is. And now that Chuck is gone and out of the picture, yeah, they would be free to do whatever it is that they were doing, and maybe were constrained by the things because of the Chuck and the heaven and the hell and all of that other stuff was kind of maybe sitting over them a little bit. And now they're free to just go out and start claiming souls or claiming humans or whatever it is that they were going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly possible. I thought it was interesting, when we talk about the Fae and supernatural, clap your hands when you believe comes up, because it is memorable when Dean microwaves Tinkerbell.
Nipples.
Yeah. But it really turned out to have a lot of other creatures that I hadn't originally thought of as Fae. You mentioned the red caps, and we talked about Mrs. Butters and some of them. I don't know that, Super Wiki referred to the Wicked Witch of Oz as being Fae. I wasn't exactly sure how they differentiated her from the bad witches Sam and Dean have run into in the real world. But I thought it was interesting that she made the link, the list. And we mentioned the red caps. Banshees have come up.
And I thought
Any of
that
the other creatures on that list that struck you?
Yeah, I thought that Striga, the one that was, eating children's life force, if that would qualify as a Fae, as opposed to just a run-of-the-mill monster. Because she was from that sort of old world Eastern European type of folklore. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering if she might count as like a Fae, a dark Fae.
Mm-hmm. Because yeah, the whole thing with Fairy is that it was, it's how they explain the unexplainable, like the changelings. If you had a child that had a developmental disorder or disease or something, well, it's obviously because the fairy stole them and replaced them with this we can't do anything with. And so yeah, I mean, a lot of the old world stories that have to do, especially like with the Striga and children, their essence being sucked away from them and dying young, that a lot of that has those ancient roots in fairy and folklore.
Yeah. And you mentioned changelings. That was definitely one that came up as being a type of Fae. And we ran into a lot of stories about supernatural children, but we never really chased the whole changeling thing too hard in the series, which would be another terrific opportunity to go after it in a reboot. We hope they're listening.
Maybe Ben has a child and then they get reunited later on and Dean's like, oh, hey, I don't know this kid. But we're still going to take care of your issue, young Benjamin.
Mm-hmm.
Or Dean Jr. shows up. How far apart in age would Ben Braden and Dean Jr. be?
Yeah.
Maybe 10 years?
Yeah, 10, 12 years, something like that. Yeah.
So there you go.
The supernatural, what is it? Supernatural, the Scooby-Doo version.
Yes. So what
But
else?
yeah.
What other things would you like to see the show ever delve into on the Fae, or what other pieces of the lore stuck out to you from other things you've read and known about the legends?
Well, the LARP episode had, I guess she was an elf. I'm not sure if she was defined as a fairy or an elf, or who she was supposed to be. But
The
she
wiki
seemed to,
counts her as a Fae.
she
But
was
the
she was
wiki,
she was very nice, though, in contrast to the previous experience. So she was coming from, I guess, the summer court of Fae. You know, it seemed like they took her in a very different direction than they took the clap your hands version of that side of the fence.
well, you do have the Seelie and the Unseelie court, and they're supposed to be the nice versus the light versus the dark. But yeah, well, and that's filtered through a morality that is not Judeo-Christian. That's the other piece here, is that I think, I agree, would be fascinating, since we've spent 15 years steeped in the Judeo-Christian apocalypse, is stepping outside it into mythologies that don't reckon things the same way.
Yeah, because you know, there even something like the Peter Pan, that was a dark story before Disney got a hold of it, or a darker story. So there's a lot of elements out there that could be explored, that would fit the series, and not be a Disney version of the series. Because I did get a little bit of a feel of a Disney princess with the LARP episode, whereas Mrs. Butters was more supernatural version of a Fae. So yeah, the Disney princess with the beauty and the charm and the grace and you know, that she seemed deceptively nice. So I'd like to know if there would be a time where, you know, other than when she was under control by this, you know, other guy, which means that there are books out there which apparently have spells to control a fairy, you know, hanging around. So the watch guy had a book, and the LARP guy had a book. So how many of these books are floating around where people are conjuring fairies to do their bidding?
Well, and the Fae also had the ability to glamour. So they could look like anything they wanted to look. They were known for making themselves, or for loving beautiful things and making themselves appear beautiful, even if their natural state would not be considered that. So that would all be well within the realm of Fae legend.
Yeah, because when Dean was saying, you know, they were also very bright, it was hard to look at them, but you could look at this gal just fine. There was no, you know, dazzling brilliance. So maybe that was a glamour that she had on, that she wasn't blinding everybody by her presence.
Well, it's supposed to be too bright to look at angels, but they did figure out how to turn down the wattage.
I mean, there's some stories where the mythological Fae creatures, that they are fallen angels. And, you know, or, well, whatever kind of that version of an angel would be. It's not, you know, the Castiel fell to earth. It's just this person got bored with where they were, and they're super powerful, and now they've just come down here and decided that, hey, you know what, humans are fun to play with. So, and also when Dean was abducted, because they kind of had that, they had that kind of alien thing going, because the leprechaun was like, oh yeah, totally aliens. Ooh. That the bright shiny light could have been the glamour, just to continue on with the story that they're trying to tell.
Yeah. Yeah, that definitely works. Although it was very satisfying to actually see an alien abduction story on Supernatural. Somewhere they kind of had to touch on that somewhere.
I'm with Bobby. Nope. Aliens aren't real.
But going back to what you said, Michelle, the idea of a celestial being that fell to Earth or came to Earth, aside from the whole, God, Lucifer, fall of heaven mythos, again, opens up all kinds of stories, because they are super powered. They don't tie back to Chuck. We don't have to resurrect any of the heaven and hell crew, and they would still be a formidable opponent in that gap of time between when they got rid of Chuck and when Dean passed away. So we can only hope that keep spreading the word, Kristen, and whispering in ears.
I think it would be fun too to explore more avenues than just good and evil, because with the Fae, I mean, they live by their own code, and their code is not necessarily Judeo-Christian. So a little bit of the chaotic mischief, and I mean, I could see Dean being like, you know what, I like that idea. And Sam's over here like lawful neutral, like, nope, I can't do that.
But the Winchesters have existed outside of the Judeo-Christian ideas of right and wrong. Every day they get up and put on a flannel and go to work. They really don't bother so much about regular laws or biblical rules.
That's why they get along so well.
Yeah. Yeah, they are more on Dean's more chaotic good. You're right. Sam's more lawful good, but maybe neutral good.
Yeah.
But that would be interesting, a whole new dynamic there. Go ahead, Kristen.
Oh, well, there's, to kind of maybe have I'm just writing the story for him here.
Right.
Having a war between the Seelie and Unseelie, and they kind of drag humanity into the middle of it, just like the angels and the demons. And so it's up to Sam and Dean to find a way to, get them to take their party back home. But to have,
can Harry Dresden come too?
Yeah.
Can we have
find a way to work him into the story? I'm trying to think. Okay.
Yeah, fiction writers, are you listening?
Yeah.
Well, but that made me think of the Harry Dresden plot arc, because he ends up doing his service to the Fae to save someone in a desperate situation, and he makes a bargain. He makes a deal, and then he owes, and he finally pays that debt off, but there are all kinds of twists and betrayals in the meantime, which does sound a lot like something that would happen to a Winchester.
Yep, sacrificing himself in order to save a friend, and then gets caught up in the whole mechanisms of this other world that he's now a part of. So that would be 100% Winchester right there. Which
sends Sam going after him into that realm. And there we have it.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
There's plenty of ground there.
Wonder, they could have, the same sort of thing with the angels and demons, enemies and allies. People that the Fae that just want to go back and to live in their forest, like Mrs. Butters, or the leprechaun, which is kind of seeing different routes and angles, when he said something like, once we're here to stay, type of thing. So he'd be wanting to, hey guys, everybody come over and, have a party on the planet.
Because there were a lot of things that I hadn't particularly originally thought of. The tooth fairy that came up in Southern Comfort, and the one that Garth mentioned, I believe, had having dealt with. Definitely still a type of fairy.
Yeah.
I honestly would have considered Cupids if they hadn't been already claimed by the angels, because they always struck me as more fairy than angel, but okay.
And
What
Legacy, well, Legacy's had Santa Claus is kind of a fae elf type. So could have Santa Claus in there.
Well, we certainly had the very supernatural Christmas people as pagan gods, but there are a lot of other creatures like Krampus and Perkta and those creatures, again, Eastern European, that we agglomerated onto Santa Claus and into the Christmas myths and kind of cleaned them up, but they're actually rather terrifying. And of course, there are elves.
Oh, I'd love to have. I mean, I'd be on board for a whole thing about Sam Dean and Elf Army versus rednecks.
So these elves now, usually we're used to seeing elves where the magic is just in them. Are they going to be the Dobby type elves that can snap their fingers and make things happen, or are they going to be Rowena style witches that are over here casting spells to make the magic happen?
More of the Legolas kind of elves, maybe even, because they definitely had magic in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, well, the gal, the elf from the LARP episode was a snap your fingers type. So maybe she would have the glamour, and she actually looked like Dobby underneath there.
Poor Charlie.
Taking a step back to the Tooth Fairy, sorry, it's so obviously the Tooth Fairy is still around, even though Garth ganked one. Are they like Cupids in death that, one gets killed, the next one just moves up?
Or like Reapers. Teeth Reapers. They're Teeth Reapers.
Well, and then there are the Xana, the imaginary friends. I don't think they ever exactly said where they fit in on the spectrum of, they weren't demonic, they weren't angelic, they didn't make the super wiki list of fae, but I thought they would fit in very well. One of the legends that I'd love to see future supernatural take on is the Wild Hunt.
Oh yeah. Yep.
I mean, it's not a moose, but it does have the stag god, the horned god. I mean, he and Sam could have a lot in common.
But Crowley has to be involved too, because he'd be like, moose meets stag, stag meet moose.
Making the deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that would be a great premise for a movie, to have something like that be the adversary that they're trying to overcome.
Yeah.
They'd be great villains.
Yeah. The Wild Hunt is just such a creepy concept. And it's something, it is very in keeping with the series for the number of times they've gone to a place that has had disappearances that pop up every 15 or 20 years or certain time period and recur. Falls very well within the legacy of the Wild Hunt.
And also kind of has that whole headless horseman aspect to it too. So they could really do some good, scary special effects with that that a feature film would be able to tackle.
I'd love for them to get back to that dark horror story in 43 minutes sort of format. That would just be that would totally bring me back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been doing another rewatch and going back to those early seasons and re-experiencing that format. You realize just how darn good it was.
Yeah, and then the desaturated color and the
Mhm.
sort of the film, well, it was shot on real film versus the later seasons, or what, after season 3 or 4 is when they got the digital cameras.
Mhm.
And then it just, everything kind of brightened up and became more cheerful. So to do a feature film, you know, in a dark movie theater with the dark woods and the headless horseman slash, you know, wild hunt coming at you from the screen in 3D, boy, I'd be there. I'd be there every day.
As long as Serge gets to do the lighting, because that guy was a genius for lighting.
Yes, for sure.
And he'd be in his element doing an episode like that, or a movie like that. Yeah. So how do you think, we've kind of heard about Dean going away to the fairy realm. How about Sam? How do you think Sam would deal with either having to get Dean back or his own encounter with the fairy realm? It's been very concentrated on Dean.
Well, he'd probably do a thorough, if I can imagine him approaching it, he'd take the literary approach and start reading everything he could to gain insight into what, you know, silver, iron, salt, the grains of salt, you know, like in the episode, the clap your hands, where he came prepared with the little vial of salt and tossed it down. Oh, damn it. 1, 2.
Mhm.
I mean, that was great. But I could see Sam going full in on the books and then trying to find allies within the fairy realm who he could approach to kind of gain some people on his side to either go rescue Dean, or if, you know, Dean and him together are trying to save the world from, you know, an outbreak of fairies. I think he'd be the researcher guy to do the, you know, the legwork while Dean is out there with the sword doing the Braveheart thing.
Very possible. How about you, Michelle?
See, I'm thinking about Sam and his kind of just personality and his, you know, being the anti-Dean essentially. Yeah, he's the book nerd. He's the one that wants to do the research. He's the one with the puppy dog eyes. The Fae would look at him and be like, "Go back to Earth. We're bored with you. Like, you're not fun. We can't play around with you. We can't mess you up. So, you know, we can't really make your emotions get the best of you like they do with Dean."
Mhm.
And, you know, he microwaved Tinkerbell, and Sam, even Solus, is like, "I'm not supposed to laugh at this, right?" So, yeah, I think the Fae would just be bored with him. I think they'd just kick him out. And yeah, I mean, for the sake of the show, he'd probably find some allies, but it's just, I don't know, he'd be very out of his element in with the Fae.
Mhm.
Also, I think since he knows so much about them, they couldn't trick him.
Mhm.
And you know, any trick that the Fae would have, you know, a big thing with Fae is naming. And he'd know right off the bat, don't give him your real name.
Don't eat anything. Don't drink anything. Don't take anything.
Right. So, and, you know, even if it is, it's like, "Oh, sir, can I have your name?" "No, you may not have it, but you may know it." And, you know, those sorts of, you know, he'd be a step ahead of them, and they wouldn't like that.
Mhm. Yes, never thank a Fae in a way that implies any kind of debt or obligation.
Oh yeah, there's whole rules when it comes to dealing with Fae.
Well, then Sam could be the sort of the exposition. He could be the one who guides the audience through some of the rules that they wouldn't otherwise be aware of for, again, a feature film where you're introducing fans who may be outside of the you know, they've never encountered a Dresden book. So you'd have to explain to them who these things are. Sam could be that voice telling people that, you know, these are the rules of the game, and these are the people, and these are the sorts of things that you got to be careful of. So Sam could be that, serve that purpose in the parts of the movie, introducing people.
And that would be very true to his nature, because dealing with the Fae is a lot like dealing with the law. The devil's in the details. And you can get off on a technicality, and there's the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, and the Fae are very letter of the law kind of creatures. So honestly, as a, previous lawyer in training, Sam would be pretty ideal for taking on the Fae as the champion to probably save Dean's hide again.
Yeah, I mean, if they featured the movie around the wild hunt coming for Dean, sort of like the hellhounds came for him, and Sam has to go on a quest to retrieve him, stop an incursion into this world of the leprechaun bringing all his, fellow leprechauns and little folk and everybody with him. Yeah, that'd be a great story. Now
But I
wanna
hope
write
they do it. I hope they would do it more
Good.
like the Mark of Cain. So Dean is there with Sam, but they're just doing everything they can to get him out of this deal. Instead of, Dean's being captured over here, being held by the summer court or whatnot, he's enjoying everything over there and the never. Whereas, Sam's here on Earth, like, what do I do? How do I get him back? How do I find this fancy tree that I have to go through? They have to stay together. Like we can't have Sam in one world and Dean in another.
Right.
That's why
Not for long, anyhow.
That's why we hate episode 20. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's always that period where one of them disappears and the other one has to figure out where to go find them. But I like your comparison to the Mark of Cain, where it's working on it together, because Sam's going after him.
Now, doesn't the captured person that the hunt goes after turns into one of the dogs? Is that
or one of the hunters, depending on the legend?
Yeah. So that'd be a cool thing to explore. Maybe these people are, once they're freed by Sam and Dean, you got all these people standing around that have been kept as, these captured souls for, 30, 40 years. And now they're kind of just standing there going, okay, what do we do? And they have to be sort of led back to normal civilization by Sam and Dean.
Well, if you're talking about the wild hunt, they could have been missing for centuries.
100 years. Yeah, that's true.
There's the wild hunt education camp.
The hunt
run by Jody Mills.
Yes, where they retrieve people from the fairy realm and train them to deal with modern life.
But I mean, that could be a whole nother spin on the hunters, because we've got the hunters for the monsters and the werewolves and the vampires and all that. We need hunters that retrieve people from the what is it, the Underhill. Get people out of there.
And see, that could also be a spin-off where we didn't get Wayward Sisters, but we could get Wayward She.
That's just confusing at this point. That's just going to confuse everyone at this point.
It's true. This is true. Well, believe it or not, we have managed to go through all of our time, and we have all kinds of ideas now. So whether the network or Chaos Machine or the fan fiction writers are listening, we hope you've gotten some good ideas out of this. But let's go around again and let folks know where they can find you online. Michelle?
You can find me on Twitter at preheatingprof.
Kristen?
And I'm on Twitter mostly for it's at Anicat, ANICAT. And I'm also sometimes on the fanfiction.net as Anicat with a 6-8 on the end.
Awesome. And I'm pretty findable online at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com. Put those names in on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or any of the other platforms, and you're likely to find me. And I'm always here on ConTinual. So thank you very much for being with us tonight to talk about fighting the fairies with supernatural. And thank all of you for watching and listening. There'll be more supernatural here on ConTinual. So we'll see you online.